The cold seeped through the cracks in the shed's walls, a familiar, unwelcome guest. Alara pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders, the rough wool scratching at her skin. It did little to ward off the chill that had less to do with the night air and more to do with the hollow ache in her bones. This was her life: a splintered shed, a threadbare blanket, and a gnawing emptiness where her pack bond should have been. She was an omega of the Blood Moon pack. Less than an omega, really. She was the wolfless outcast, the target of every sneer, the recipient of every leftover scrap. They called her a disgrace, a dead weight on the pack's resources. The truth was a secret she guarded with the ferocity of a mother protecting her young, a secret chained deep within her soul. A sharp rap on the flimsy wooden door made her flinch. It was too early for her chores, too late for a casual visit. No one ever visited her casually. "Get out here, filth!" Lyra's voice, sharp and cruel as broken glass, cut through the wood. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Lyra, the daughter of their pack's alpha, Borin, took a special, sadistic pleasure in tormenting her. She was beautiful, with fiery red hair and the arrogant confidence of the highborn, and she hated Alara with a passion that was almost religious in its fervor. Alara pushed herself to her feet, her body protesting with a litany of aches. She opened the door, keeping her eyes fixed on the muddy ground. Looking Lyra in the eye was an invitation for a slap. "The kitchens are a pigsty," Lyra sneered, her two shadows, Mara and Kala, flanking her. "Even for you, I want the floors gleaming before sunrise." "Yes, Lyra," Alara murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Lyra's lip curled. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, Omega." Slowly, Alara lifted her head. Lyra's eyes, the color of hard jade, narrowed with disgust. The slap came, fast and expected. The sting exploded across Alara's cheek, but she didn't cry out. She had learned long ago that tears only made them more vicious. "Pathetic," Lyra spat, turning on her heel. "Get to it, and don't even think about eating until I say you can." Alara watched them go, her hand rising to her throbbing cheek. The humiliation was a thick, choking bile in her throat. She took a deep, shuddering breath, pushing down the rage, the despair. She chained it all down, deep inside, right next to the far more dangerous secret she kept. The secret that would get her killed if they ever found out. She wasn't wolfless. Far from it. Inside her, a beast of impossible power slumbered. A creature of silver light and cosmic rage, a being whispered about only in the oldest legends, the lunar wolf. It was a hurricane chained inside a glass jar, and every day the glass cracked a little more. She had to suppress its scent, its power, its very existence, using energy she barely had. In a world that valued strength above all, a power like hers, unattached to a recognized bloodline, would be seen not as a gift, but as an apocalyptic threat to be extinguished. The packhouse kitchens were vast and cold. The lingering smell of roasted meat and stale ale from the previous night's feast hung heavy in the air. A mountain of greasy pots and pans was piled in the stone sink. Alara tied a rough apron around her waist and got to work. Her hands, raw and chapped, plunged into the cold, greasy water. She scrubbed until her knuckles were bleeding, her back a knot of searing pain. The other Omegas, those with wolves and a place, however low, in the pack hierarchy, gave her a wide berth. They pitied her, some of them, but their fear of Lyra and Alpha Borin was greater than their compassion. To associate with Alara was to invite the same abuse. Hours later, as the first hint of dawn painted the sky in shades of bruised purple, Alpha Borin strode into the kitchen. He was a mountain of a man, his presence filling the space with an aura of brutish authority. His gaze fell on Alara, and his face twisted into a familiar scowl. "Still here?" he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "You're an eyesore, girl." I'm almost finished, Alpha, she said, her voice small. He grabbed a piece of bread from a nearby basket, tearing into it with his teeth. You are a constant reminder of failure, a wolfless whelp. My father should have left you in the woods to die when your parents were killed. Each word was a stone, adding to the wall of misery that had been built around her since she was a child. Her parents, rogues who had been granted sanctuary, had died in a border skirmish when she was 5. Alpha Boren's father had been a kinder man, but his son had inherited none of his compassion. When Alara failed to shift at the expected age, Boren's tolerance had curdled into open contempt. She finished her work in silence, her stomach cramping with hunger. She was allowed the leftovers, the burnt bits, and discarded crusts, but only after everyone else had eaten. Today, there was nothing. Lyra had made sure of it. Later that morning, a wave of panic and excitement rippled through the pack. A rider had arrived, his wolf panting at his side, bearing a scroll with the royal seal. Alara was sweeping the main hall when the announcement was made. Alpha Boren stood on the grand staircase, his voice booming with forced enthusiasm. Pack members, we are to be honored. The Alpha King, Kalen, will be arriving at sundown for the annual inspection. All members are required to assemble in the main square. No exceptions. A collective gasp went through the assembled pack. The Alpha King. The Alpha of Alphas. Kalen was a legend, a terrifying myth made flesh. He had ascended to the throne 5 years ago after his father's assassination and had carved a path of brutal, bloody efficiency across the territories, uniting the packs under his iron will. He was said to be ruthless, cold, and impossibly powerful. His royal pack, the Lycan Guard, were said to be specters, moving unseen and unheard, and he was mateless. The stories said his wolf was a feral beast, driven half-mad by the lack of its other half, making the king even more volatile. Alara's blood ran cold. No exceptions. She couldn't hide in her shed. She couldn't feign illness. She would have to stand in the square with everyone else under the direct scrutiny of the most powerful alpha on the continent. An alpha whose senses would be sharper, more perceptive than any she had ever encountered. The delicate control she maintained over her wolf, over her scent, felt terrifyingly fragile. Being in the presence of such overwhelming power might shatter it completely. The hurricane would break the glass jar. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. This was it. The day her secret would be exposed. The day she would be executed as a monstrous anomaly. Throughout the day, the pack house was a flurry of manic activity. Everything was being scrubbed, polished, and prepared. Ilara was worked harder than ever, a ghost moving through the chaos, her mind racing. She had to find a way to mask her scent, to dampen the power that thrummed just beneath her skin. She remembered an old tale her mother used to tell her about a rare herb, moon petal, that could confuse a wolf's senses. It grew deep in the dark woods bordering their territory, a place she was forbidden to go. But desperation was a powerful motivator. Under the cover of the frantic preparations, she slipped out of the pack house. The woods were dense and shadowed, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but the fear of the Alpha King was greater. Every snap of a twig made her jump. She found the moon petals in a small shaded clearing, their pale, almost translucent flowers glowing faintly in the dim light. She crushed them in her hands, the milky, cloying sap coating her fingers. She rubbed the paste onto her pulse points, behind her ears, along her neck, praying it would be enough. The scent was strange, slightly sweet, but with an earthy bitterness. It made her own senses feel dull and clouded. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, bloody fingers of light across the sky, Alara made her way back, her heart a frantic drum. She slipped into the back of the crowd assembling in the square. pulling her thin shawl over her head, trying to make herself as small and insignificant as possible. Then he arrived. It was not a grand procession with banners and trumpets. It was a sudden, oppressive silence. The air grew thick, heavy with a power so immense it felt like the sky was pressing down on them. A low, collective growl rumbled through the assembled blood moon wolves as their own animals instinctively bristled at the sheer dominance rolling off the newcomers. Alpha King Kalen walked into the square, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He was even more intimidating than the legends claimed. Taller than any man she had ever seen, well over 6.5 feet, with shoulders as broad as a doorway. He was dressed in simple black leather that did nothing to hide the lethal power coiled in his frame. His face was all harsh lines and sharp angles, as if carved from granite by a merciless sculptor. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs. They were a startling, luminous violet, glowing with an inner light that was utterly inhuman. They were the eyes of a predator, cold, ancient, and utterly without mercy. He was flanked by a man who had to be his beta, Riker, nearly as large and just as intimidating, his eyes scanning the crowd with cold assessment. But Kalen's focus was elsewhere. His violet gaze swept over the pack, not with interest, but with a deep, predatory weariness. He was searching, hunting. Alpha Born approached him, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the ground. Alpha King Kalen, you honor us with your presence. Kalen didn't even look at him. His gaze continued its slow, methodical sweep of the crowd. Borin. The name was a flat, dismissive statement. Alara shrank back, trying to hide behind a burly warrior in front of her. She could feel his power like a physical force, pressing against her shields. The moon petal paste felt like a pathetic, childish ward against a tidal wave. The hurricane in her chest was stirring, rattling its chains. He started walking along the front line, his heavy boots silent on the cobblestones. His violet eyes passed over each face, a flicker of something. Disappointment? Frustration? In their depths, with each one. He was looking for his mate. The entire continent knew it. His search was relentless, a desperate 5-year quest. Alara held her breath, praying he would not come near the back. Please, just let him finish and leave. But he didn't stop at the front lines. He moved deeper into the crowd, his presence parting the wolves like a ship through water. They scrambled to get out of his way, their heads bowed in submission. He was getting closer. The air crackled around him. The scent of a raging winter storm and ancient pine trees filled her senses, cutting through the cloying smell of the moon petal. It was the most incredible thing she had ever smelled. It called to something deep inside her, something primal and forgotten. The hurricane in her chest stilled, listening. He was only a few feet away now. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, her entire body trembling. This is it. I'm dead. He passed her. Nothing happened. He walked right by. A wave of dizzying relief washed over her, so potent it almost made her knees buckle. He hadn't noticed. The herbs had worked. She was safe. But then, he stopped. He went completely still, his back ramrod straight. The oppressive aura of his power, which had been a steady, crushing weight, suddenly spiked, becoming a sharp, focused point. The warrior she was hiding behind was shoved aside as if by an invisible force. Slowly, the Alpha King turned. His violet eyes, no longer weary but blazing with a manic, feral light, locked directly onto hers. The world fell away. There was only the apocalyptic intensity of his gaze. A single word echoed in the dead silence of the square, not spoken aloud, but blasted into the minds of every wolf present. A psychic roar that shook the very foundations of their being. Mine. The word slammed into Alara with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a claim. It was a statement of fact. An ancient truth finally spoken. The chains around her soul shattered. The hurricane broke free. The dormant lunar wolf surged forward, recognizing its other half. A jolt of pure energy, hot and electric, shot through her. A magnetic pull so powerful it was agonizing. Her scent, her true scent, exploded from her like a supernova, no longer suppressed by the moon petals or her own desperate will. It was the scent of midnight blossoms, of silver moonlight, of stardust and ozone. It was unique, intoxicating, and utterly, overwhelmingly powerful. Kalen inhaled sharply, his head tilting back, as if he'd just tasted the most exquisite wine. A low, possessive growl, this one audible, tore from his throat. It was a sound of pure, primal ownership, a promise of violence to any who dared to look, to breathe, to exist too close to what was his. Panic, raw and absolute, swamped Ilara. This wasn't supposed to happen. He found me, he knows. She did the only thing her terrified mind could think of. She ran. Twisting out of the crowd, she bolted, her bare feet slapping against the cold stones. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from those burning violet eyes, from the terrifying power that was calling to the monster inside her. "Stop!" Kalen commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a quiet, lethal order imbued with the full force of his alpha authority. It hit the wolves in the square like a physical blow, forcing them to their knees. But it didn't work on Alara. His command washed over her, a powerful suggestion, but not an unbreakable compulsion. Her own latent power, now unleashed, buffered her from the worst of it. It only made her run faster. She heard a furious snarl behind her and the sound of chaos erupting, but she didn't look back. She fled towards the woods, the only sanctuary she had ever known. The king's fury was a palpable thing, a storm breaking over the Blood Moon pack. He had found her. After 5 years of searching every pack, every settlement, every miserable corner of his kingdom. After 5 years of the gnawing emptiness, the feral rage of his wolf, the cold despair that had become his constant companion. He had found her, and she had run from him. His wolf, a beast of shadow and rage, was clawing at the inside of his skin, demanding to be let out, to hunt, to claim. The scent she had released, it was divine. It had saturated his senses, a balm to his tormented soul, and the most addictive substance he had ever encountered. And it was tainted. Underneath the moonlight and stardust, he could smell her pain, her fear, her exhaustion. Someone had hurt his mate. The thought sent a wave of apocalyptic rage through him, so powerful that the wolves still kneeling in the square whimpered in terror. His violet eyes, now glowing with lethal intent, swept over the crowd. "No one moves," he snarled, his voice a low promise of death. "Riker, with me." He moved, not running, but flowing, a blur of black leather and contained violence. He crossed the square in a handful of heartbeats, following the silver trail of her scent. It led, predictably, to the dark woods. Lyra watched from the crowd, her face a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. The king, the Alpha King, had looked at that filth, as if she were a goddess. He had claimed her. The Omega trash who scrubbed her floors, the wolfless nothing. Jealousy, hot and venomous, coiled in her gut. It was a mistake, a trick. The Omega must have used some kind of dark magic, some forbidden herb to bewitch the king. She had to be punished. She had to be exposed for the fraud she was. An ugly, vicious idea began to form in her mind. The king thought he had found his fated mate. But what would he do when he saw what a weak, pathetic creature she truly was? What if he saw her broken and bleeding at his feet? His interest would turn to disgust. He would discard her, and then Lyra could step in, the strong, worthy she-wolf, to comfort him. She caught her father's eye across the square. Alpha Boren looked as stunned and furious as she felt. The king's attention on the Omega was an insult to him, to his pack, to his daughter. Lyra gave him a subtle nod, a flicker of her eyes towards the woods. He understood. Later that night, after the king's initial furious search had turned up nothing, Alara had vanished like a ghost into the woods she knew so well. Lyra gathered her cronies. Mara and Kala were eager, their own jealousy stoked by the king's shocking declaration. "We need to find her," Lyra hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "We need to show the king what she really is before she can poison his mind any further." "Our Alpha is with you," Kala said. "He wants her found. He said she's brought shame on this pack." They formed a hunting party, a small group of the pack's most thuggish enforcers, led by Lyra. Her father had given his tacit approval. They moved through the woods, their senses sharp, tracking the faint, lingering scent of the Omega. They were not subtle like the king's guard. They were a blunt instrument of hate. They found her huddled in a hollow log, shivering, her body racked with terror and confusion. The brief surge of power had faded, leaving her more exhausted than ever before. The mate bond was a constant, agonizing pull in her chest, a hook that connected her to the terrifying Alpha King. "There you are, little rat," Lyra sneered, yanking Alara out of the log by her hair. Ilara cried out as pain exploded in her scalp. "Please, just leave me alone." "Leave you alone?" Lyra laughed, a high, ugly sound. "Oh no. You've made a terrible mistake, Omega. You tried to fly too close to the sun. We're just going to pluck your filthy feathers." They dragged her, kicking and struggling, back towards the packlands. But they didn't take her to the pack house. They dragged her to the training arena, a wide circular pit of dirt and bloodstains where pack warriors settled disputes. The entire pack was there. Alpha Boran stood on a raised platform, his arms crossed, his face a thunderous mask. He had ordered them all to assemble, to witness the Omega's punishment. Lyra threw Alara into the center of the pit. She stumbled and fell, landing hard on the packed earth. A wave of jeers and insults washed over her from the watching crowd. "This creature," Alpha Boran's voice boomed, silencing the crowd, "has brought disgrace upon us. She has attempted to deceive our king with foul scent magic." He turned his cold eyes on Alara. "You claim to have a wolf. You claim to be worthy of the king's notice. Then prove it. Shift. Show us the mighty wolf you're hiding." The crowd took up the chant. "Shift! Shift! Shift!" Alara scrambled backwards, shaking her head. "I can't." Lyra stepped into the pit, a cruel smile on her face. "She can't, because she's nothing. She's wolfless, a parasite." She kicked Alara hard in the ribs. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot through Alara's side. She gasped, curling into a ball. "Get up!" Lyra shrieked, kicking her again. "Fight back! Oh, that's right. You can't." The beating began. Lyra and her enforcers descended on her, their kicks and punches raining down. Alara gritted her teeth, the coppery taste of blood filling her mouth. She tried to shield her head, her body screaming in agony. The pain was immense, but it was the humiliation that was breaking her. The entire pack, the people she had tried to serve despite their cruelty, were watching her be brutalized, and they were cheering. A small whimper cut through the noise. A young Omega pup, no older than 7, had darted out from the crowd. He had always been kind to Alara, sometimes sneaking her a piece of bread when no one was looking. He stood over her, his small body trembling, trying to shield her. "Leave her alone." Lyra stopped, looking down at the pup with cold fury. "Get out of the way, you little brat." The pup stood his ground, tears streaming down his face. "No." Lyra's hand shot out, grabbing the pup by the scruff of his neck. She lifted him off the ground, his feet kicking helplessly. "Maybe you need to be taught a lesson about associating with filth." Something inside Alara snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was an instinct, ancient and absolute. The sight of the terrified child in the hands of her tormentor was the final, unforgivable sin. The pain, the fear, the years of humiliation, it all coalesced into a single point of incandescent rage. The hurricane didn't just break the glass jar, it vaporized it. A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound that didn't come from her human throat. It was deeper, more resonant, filled with the promise of utter annihilation. Lyra froze, her eyes widening. What was that? And then the light came. It wasn't a fire or an explosion. It was a silent, impossible wave of pure, liquid silver light that erupted from Alara's body. It blasted outwards, washing over the entire arena. It wasn't hot, but it was heavy, filled with a power so ancient and immense that it felt like the weight of the moon itself descending upon them. Every wolf in the arena, from the lowest Omega to Alpha Boran himself, was slammed to their knees as if by a giant, invisible hand. The air crackled with raw, untamed power. The jeers and cheers died, replaced by a single collective gasp of absolute terror. In the center of the blinding light, Alara's form twisted and reformed. It was not the violent, bone-snapping process of a normal shift. It was fluid, graceful, silent. Her broken, battered human body dissolved into starlight and re-emerged as something else, something legendary. The light receded, coiling back into the creature that stood where the broken Omega had been. It was a wolf. But it was like no wolf any of them had ever seen. It was enormous, larger than the largest alpha, its frame a perfect balance of lean, lethal muscle and impossible grace. Its fur was not white or gray or black. It was the color of pure molten silver, shimmering and shifting as if woven from moonlight itself. Its eyes were not yellow or blue, but the color of the cosmos, swirling pools of nebulae and starlight that held the wisdom of ages. Power rolled off it in apocalyptic waves, an aura of celestial judgment and primal authority that made the king's own power seem like a candle flame next to a supernova. This was the lunar wolf, the mate of the first alpha, the queen of all wolves, a being of myth and prophecy. Silence. Absolute, terrified, reverent silence fell over the Blood Moon pack. They stared, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. Lyra had dropped the pup, who scrambled away. She was on her hands and knees, trembling uncontrollably, her face ashen with a terror so profound it had erased her cruelty completely. Alpha Boran, on his platform, looked like he had seen a god and knew he was about to be judged. A shadow fell over the entrance to the arena. Alpha King Kalen stood there, his Beta Riker at his side. He had been drawn by the sudden, impossible spike of power, a celestial flare on his mate bond senses that had nearly brought him to his knees miles away. He had followed it here. His royal pack, the Lycan Guard, materialized from the shadows around the perimeter of the arena, silent specters with glowing eyes, cutting off all escape. They had been there for hours, watching, waiting for his command. Kalen's violet eyes took in the scene, the kneeling pack, the terrified Lyra, the scent of Alara's blood on the ground, and in the center of it all, the magnificent celestial being that was his mate, his queen. His wolf sang in his soul, a chorus of triumph, reverence, and murderous rage. They had dared to harm a goddess. They had dared to spill her sacred blood. He ignored the cowering pack. He ignored the whimpering Alpha Boran. His eyes were only for her. He walked into the pit, his steps slow and deliberate. The massive silver wolf turned its cosmic gaze upon him. There was no fear in those eyes now, only a deep, questioning calm. When he was 10 feet from her, Alpha King Kalen, the ruthless tyrant, the alpha of alphas, the most feared being on the continent, did something no one had ever seen him do. He dropped to one knee. He bowed his head, a gesture of ultimate respect, of utter submission to a higher power. His voice, when he spoke, was not a command. It was a vow. It rang out in the charged silence, filled with an awe and devotion that was terrifying in its intensity. My queen. The silver wolf took a step towards him, then another. It lowered its massive head and nudged his bowed shoulder, a gesture of acceptance, of forgiveness, of welcome. Kalen raised his head, and the look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated adoration. He reached out a hand, not to touch her, but simply to be nearer to her radiance. Then his gaze lifted, passing over her to the cowering figures of Lyra and her father. The adoration in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold violet fire that promised an eternity of pain. You, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that carried to every corner of the arena. You will all pay for this. The magnificent silver wolf beside him let out a low growl of agreement, and the entire Blood Moon pack knew their world had just ended. The moments that followed were a blur of controlled, terrifying efficiency. Kalen did not need to raise his voice. His Lycan guard moved with silent, lethal grace, seizing Alpha Borin, Lyra, and every one of the enforcers who had laid a hand on Alara. There was no resistance. To resist was to invite immediate death. Kalen remained kneeling before Alara, his eyes never leaving her. He was waiting, giving her control. It was her justice to dispense, not his. His role was to be her weapon. The lunar wolf held his gaze for a long moment, a silent communication passing between them. Then, with a grace that defied its size, it turned and padded towards the arena entrance. The message was clear. Later. First, she needed sanctuary. Take her to my quarters, Kalen commanded Riker, his voice soft again. Clear the entire wing. No one is to come within 100 yards of her without my express permission. Riker bowed. Yes, my king. Alara was escorted from the arena, the king's guard forming a protective phalanx around her. The remaining pack members didn't dare to move, didn't dare to breathe, until the king finally rose to his feet. He turned his apocalyptic gaze upon the captured Borin and Lyra, who were being held in an iron grip by his guards. The rest of you, he said to the crowd, his voice like cracking ice, will remain here. You will contemplate your failure. You harbored a goddess, and you treated her like dirt. You will be judged, every one of you. He strode from the arena without a backward glance, the promise of his wrath hanging in the air like a shroud. The royal wing of the Blood Moon packhouse had been transformed. It was a fortress within a fortress. Kalen found Alara, now back in her human form, huddled in the center of a ridiculously large bed, wrapped in a silk sheet. She was clean. The guards had provided a bath, but she looked small and lost, her eyes wide with shock and exhaustion. The bruises from her beating were stark against her pale skin, a visceral testament to the abuse she had suffered. Seeing them sent a fresh wave of murderous rage through him, so potent he had to clench his fists to keep from shifting and tearing the packhouse apart. He forced it down. She didn't need his rage right now. She needed his calm. Alara, he said softly, testing her name on his tongue. It felt right. Perfect. She flinched, pulling the sheet tighter. Your Majesty. Kalen, he corrected, taking a slow step into the room. My name is Kalen. He stopped, keeping a respectful distance. He could feel her fear, a sharp counterpoint to the glorious, magnetic pull of their bond. I will not hurt you. I swear on my life. No one will ever hurt you again. Tears welled in her eyes. What am I? She whispered, her voice cracking. He finally allowed himself a small, genuine smile. It felt foreign on his face. You are my queen, he said, his voice thick with reverence. You are the lunar wolf, a legend, a prophecy I had given up hope of ever seeing fulfilled. He sat on a chair across the room, giving her space. He began to explain, his voice a low, steady rumble. He told her the ancient stories, the lore passed down through the royal line. The first alpha, blessed by the sky god, had a mate blessed by the moon goddess, the lunar wolf, a being of immense power, a protector, a healer, a balancer to the alpha king's raw, destructive force. They were two halves of a whole, their bond the anchor of all werewolf society. But the line was thought to be lost, he explained. For 1,000 years, there has been no lunar wolf. The Alpha Kings grew colder, more brutal, their wolves unbalanced without their celestial mate. My wolf. He has been a feral beast my entire life, until today, until he found you. Alara listened, her mind reeling. A queen? A goddess? It was impossible. She was Alara, the Omega, the filth who scrubbed floors. Yet, she could still feel the echo of that immense power inside her, the calm, wise presence of the silver wolf. It wasn't a monster. It was her. Why me? She asked, her voice trembling. My parents were rogues. They may have been, Kaelin said gently. But somewhere in your bloodline, the power of the moon goddess lay dormant, waiting. It chose you, Alara. And the bond, it chose us. He gestured between them. Can you feel it? She nodded, clutching her chest. It's a pull. It hurts. It only hurts because we are not complete, he said, his violet eyes intense. It is a call for union, for proximity. It will ease. He paused. I know this is overwhelming. All you need to know right now is this. You are safe. You are cherished. And you have absolute authority. The next day was the day of judgment. The training arena was transformed. A throne had been brought from the pack house and placed on the platform where Alpha Boren had stood. Kaelin led Alara, dressed in a simple but elegant silver gown one of his guards had procured, to the platform. He didn't take the throne. He gestured for her to sit. She hesitated. I can't. You can, he said, his voice firm but kind. This is your justice. He remained standing beside the throne, a silent, formidable guard. Her guard, Alpha Boren, Lyra, and the enforcers were dragged into the center of the pit. They looked broken, their arrogance shattered by a night in the king's custody and the dawning, terrifying reality of their situation. Alpha Boren of the Blood Moon Pack. Kaelin's voice boomed, devoid of any warmth. You are charged with treason. You harbored the Lunar Queen, and you not only failed to recognize her, you actively abused her, allowed her to be abused, and orchestrated a public assault against her person. Boren fell to his knees. Mercy, my king. I didn't know. How could I have known? Ignorance is not a defense, Kaelin roared, his power slamming into the man. You were cruel because you are a cruel man. You are a bully because you are weak. Your alpha title is a sham. You are unworthy. He looked to Alara. My queen. What is your judgment? All eyes turned to her. The entire pack, still assembled, held their breath. Alara looked at the man who had made her life a living hell. She saw no remorse in his eyes, only fear for himself. She thought of the cold, the hunger, the endless degradation. She stood, her voice clear and steady, imbued with an authority she didn't know she possessed. You strip me of my dignity. You denied me a place in my pack. You will learn what it is to have nothing. She looked at Kaelin. Strip him of his title, his power, his name. Let him live out his days in the deepest cell of your darkest prison, with no one to speak his name, until he is forgotten by the world. A murmur of shock went through the crowd. It was a fate worse than death for a proud alpha. Kaelin nodded, a grimly satisfied look on his face. As the queen commands. He gestured to his guards. Take him. Boren was dragged away, screaming curses that were quickly silenced. Then Kaelin turned to Lyra. She was weeping, a pathetic, sniveling mess. Lyra, daughter of no one, he began, his voice dripping with contempt. for your jealousy, your cruelty, and for laying violent hands upon your queen. What say you, Alara?" Alara looked at the girl who had been her chief tormentor. She saw the years of sneers, the slaps, the kicks. She remembered the terror in the young pup's eyes. "You thrive on status," Alara said, her voice cold as ice. "You live for the admiration of others. You will have neither." She pointed a trembling finger at her. "You will be stripped of your rank. You will be marked as a rogue, cast out from this land. You will wander the world alone, with no pack to take you in, no one to offer you comfort. You will be as you made me feel, utterly alone." Lyra let out a horrified wail. For a wolf, exile was the cruelest sentence. "It is done," Kalen declared. His guards dragged a screaming Lyra away to be marked and cast out. The other enforcers were sentenced to long terms of hard labor in the royal mines. Justice had been served. Swift, absolute, cathartic. In the days that followed, Alara began to slowly acclimate to her new reality. Kalen was a constant, steady presence. He was patient, teaching her about her powers, about the history of her lineage. He never pushed, never demanded. He was simply there, his devotion a warm, protective shield around her. The mate bond, once a source of pain and confusion, settled into a gentle, humming warmth in her chest whenever he was near. It was a current of shared emotion, of deep, instinctual understanding. She could feel his adoration, his protectiveness, and underneath it all, a deep well of loneliness that her presence was finally beginning to fill. She was learning to accept the silver wolf within her. It was not a separate entity, but a part of her soul, the source of her strength, her wisdom, her power. She could call upon its light, a soft, healing glow that soothed the lingering aches in her body and soul. They were preparing to leave the Blood Moon Pack, now under the temporary command of Riker until a suitable new alpha could be chosen, and return to the capital. Alara was in her opulent chambers, looking at her reflection in a large, silver-gilded mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were brighter, her skin had a healthy glow, and she stood taller, the perpetual fear in her posture replaced by a quiet confidence. A faint sound from the adjoining room, a soft scrape, pulled her from her thoughts. Kalen was in a meeting with Riker. She was supposed to be alone. She frowned, her senses, now incredibly sharp, on high alert. The scent in the air was wrong. It was faint, masked by some kind of alchemical agent, but underneath it, she smelled ambition and a bitter, venomous jealousy. The door to her chambers creaked open. A man she vaguely recognized from the King's Council stepped inside. He was tall, aristocratic, with cold, calculating eyes, Lord Valerius, a distant cousin of the king. He held a small, ornate crossbow, the bolt tipped with a sinister black substance, wolfsbane concentrate, lethal. "Lunar Queen," he said, his voice a silky, condescending purr. "A beautiful myth, but a myth that is inconveniently real." Ilara's heart hammered, but it was not the helpless terror of the Omega in the shed. It was the alert readiness of a predator. "Valerius, what is the meaning of this?" "The meaning?" He raised the crossbow. "The meaning is that the throne should have been mine. Kalen is too sentimental, too distracted by his pathetic quest for a mate. With him gone, and his little prophecy neutralized," he gestured at her with the weapon, "the council would have no choice but to name me as his successor." He had planned to assassinate the king. Her arrival had complicated his plans. He had to eliminate her first. "You think you can kill me and get away with it?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. She was stalling, her mind racing. The silver wolf inside her was awake, watching, waiting. "Oh, I'm quite sure," Valerius sneered. "A tragic accident. The unstable Omega, unable to control her newfound power, imploded. Sad, really. Now hold still. This will be much less messy if you don't struggle. He aimed the crossbow at her heart. Alara didn't scream. She didn't cower. She smiled. A cold, feral, beautiful smile. "You are a fool," she said, and she unleashed her power. It wasn't the uncontrolled explosive wave from the arena. This was focused, controlled. She didn't shift. Instead, she reached for the moonlight, even though it was daytime. The power of the lunar wolf was not dependent on the moon's physical presence, but on its celestial essence. The room plunged into an unnatural twilight. Beams of pure silver energy, as solid as steel, shot from the shadows, wrapping around Valerius's arms and legs. They were not ropes. They were tendrils of solidified moonlight, cold and unyielding. He cried out in shock as the crossbow was wrenched from his grasp, clattering to the floor. He struggled, but the bonds held him fast, pinning him like an insect in a web. "What is this sorcery?" he snarled, his eyes wide with panic. "This is not sorcery," Alara said, advancing on him. Her eyes began to glow with that same cosmic light as her wolf's. "This is a queen, protecting her king." She reached out a hand, and a whip of silver light manifested in her palm. She was not a victim anymore. She was a warrior. She was ready to defend her home, her mate, her new life. The door to the chamber exploded inwards, ripped from its hinges. Kalen stood there, his form crackling with the effort of holding back his shift. His eyes were blazing violet infernos fixed on the bound Valerius. He had felt her spike of alarm, the surge of her power through their bond, and had come like a freight train. He saw Alara, unharmed, powerful, in complete control. He saw his treacherous cousin bound in her light. A fierce, possessive pride swelled in his chest, so potent it almost choked him. She had not needed saving, she had saved herself. But the intent to harm her remained, and for that, there was no forgiveness. "Valerius," Kalen's voice was a death rattle. The man's face went white with ultimate terror. "Kalen, it's not what it looks like." Kalen ignored him. He looked at Alara, a question in his eyes. Her judgment. Always her judgment first. Ilara looked at the pathetic, struggling man and felt no pity. He had threatened her king. He had threatened their future. "He plotted to kill you," she said, her voice ringing with cold authority. "He sought to usurp the throne. He is a traitor of the highest order." She met Kalen's gaze, her own glowing with silver light. "His life is forfeit." That was all Kalen needed to hear. He moved, a blur of shadow and fury. The silver bonds holding Valerius vanished as Alara released them. Before the traitor could even fall to the floor, Kalen had him by the throat, lifting him into the air. "You threatened my queen!" Kalen snarled, his voice a low, guttural sound of pure rage. "You threatened my mate." There was a sickening crack of bone. Valerius's body went limp. Kalen dropped him like a piece of trash. The threat was neutralized. The final challenge met and conquered. Kalen turned to Alara, the fury in his eyes melting away, replaced by that overwhelming, boundless adoration. He crossed the room in 2 strides and gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. "You were magnificent," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. She leaned against him, finally letting the tension drain from her body. She felt his strength, the steady beat of his heart, the unwavering hum of their bond. She was home. "You are my king," she whispered. "I will always protect you." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his violet eyes searching hers. "And you are my queen, my everything." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that was not about passion, but about sealing a promise. It was a kiss of equals, of partners, of 2 halves of a single soul, finally made whole. 6 months later. The wind was cool and sweet as it swept across the grand balcony of the royal palace. It carried the scent of 1,000 blooming flowers from the city gardens below, and the distant, crisp smell of the snow-capped mountains that ringed the capital. Alara, queen of all werewolves, leaned against the marble balustrade, looking out over her kingdom. She wore a gown of midnight blue that shimmered with embroidered silver thread, a circlet of silver and moonstones resting on her brow. She was no longer the frightened Omega from the shed. Her power was a comfortable, familiar cloak she wore with ease, a quiet silver aura that clung to her. The people of the capital adored her. Stories of the lunar queen, of her beauty, her power, and her justice had spread like wildfire across the territories. She was a symbol of hope, of a new, brighter era. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a familiar, comforting weight settled against her back. Kalen rested his chin on her shoulder, his own scent of winter storm and pine a soothing balm. "What is my queen contemplating so seriously?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She smiled, leaning back into his embrace. "I was just remembering," she said softly. "A different life, a different girl." He tightened his hold, his own memories of her pain a constant dull ache in his soul. "That girl is gone. She was forged in fire, and she emerged a diamond." "She was an ember?" Ilara corrected gently, turning in his arms to face him. She placed a hand on his chest, over his heart. "Lost and buried. You didn't save me, Kalen. You gave me the spark I needed to set myself ablaze." His violet eyes, once so cold and haunted, were now filled with a warmth that was reserved only for her. "Then let us burn together for the next 1,000 years," he vowed, his voice thick with a love so profound it was a physical presence between them. He looked down at her, at his mate, his queen, his entire world. The shy, battered Omega had been utterly transformed, not into someone else, but into the magnificent being she was always meant to be. He had searched for a mate to soothe the beast in his soul, and he had found a goddess who had taught him how to be a king. She rose on her toes, and he lowered his head to meet her. Their lips met in a tender, lingering kiss, a silent affirmation of their journey, their love, and the future that stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. From a forgotten ember in a broken-down shed, a purifying silver flame had risen to rule the world. Her reign, and their love story, was just beginning. And that's where we'll end today's story, my friends. What an incredible journey for our lunar queen Ilara. From the lowest of the low to the highest ruler in the land, a true zero-to-hero story. Did you get chills when she finally revealed her lunar wolf form? I know I did. And the way the Alpha King just knelt before her? Absolutely iconic. If you enjoyed watching Ilara get her much-deserved revenge and find her fated mate, please destroy that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want to see more stories just like this one. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new tale of romance, revenge, and royal destinies. Now for my question of the day. What sentence should Kalen have given Lyra? Was exile too lenient? Or was it the perfect punishment? Let me know your most creative and satisfying judgments in the comments below. I can't wait to read what you all come up with. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.